Hey everyone, CW Music here. I'm CWD, and we're going to take a gander at this new Typhoon album, Offerings. Typhoon is a indie rock, alternative rock, sort of a baroque pop, and to a lesser extent a post-rock band that has about 11 members in it. But the mastermind of this Oregon-based band is singer-songwriter Kyle Morton. These guys have been around for a little while now, at least at some point in the late 2000s. They have like 3 other albums under their belt. Can't say I've listened to any of them, but my philosophy with new bands, or at least new bands to me, is that a new album is always a good time to jump into someone's discography. Plus, when I was going through albums to anticipate for the year, I stumbled upon this one in particular, and it was about supposedly memory loss and the loss of human identity and all that, so I thought I'd definitely look into this. Plus, the album was pretty lengthy, and I haven't really stumbled on very many rock albums that were close to the 70-minute mark in a while, let alone ones with a full range concept from beginning to end. So I figured this could sound exciting. It definitely had a lot of promise to it, so I decided to give it a few tries. And with this album, it definitely hit me on the right places when it comes to executing not just an interesting concept, but also really good instrumentalism. As mentioned, the album is 68 minutes long. It's about 14 tracks. The closing track actually has a hidden track in it, which is a little odd since we don't live in the late 90s and the 2000s anymore. But the weird thing is, after listening to this thing so many times, it doesn't really feel like it's that long at all. The bulk of the length of this album comes more so in just 2 or 3 tracks, namely the closing track, Sleep, and Empiricist. They make do with the lengths of their songs, some of them, like I mentioned, being about 11 minutes, and others being like 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, and the shortest track on the album being less than a minute. The album does a really great job of maintaining a linear narrative structure from beginning to end. Basically, the album is about this sort of tragic hero that lost all of his memory, and now he's going through the motions of what that means for him for the rest of his life. The album basically contains a lot of struggling and suffering, and unfortunately it doesn't look like there's very much of a way out. Maybe slivers of hope here and there, but nothing that's going to ever retrieve his identity back, no matter how hard anybody involved tries. And eventually it leads to a sort of demise. The whole album basically begins with a spoken word passage right at the beginning from Kyle Morton, where he says that what you're about to lose is going to hurt the most, in which case that's your memory. There are moments on the album that demonstrate hope, namely tracks like Beachtowel or Remember, and there's actually a little mantra that's on a few of these tracks, Asa Nisi Masa, which is actually a reference to a movie in the 60s called 8½, where it's pretty much a mnemonic device that's supposed to harken back to a childhood, and it's actually the one sliver of hope that's across this album. Lyrically, the album itself is in ways the indie rock answer to an album like The Downward Spiral. You have this sort of suffering in a way because of something that they can't control, and it just gets getting worse and worse and worse, and it looks like there's only one way out. I'm not going to spoil too much about the story here, even if the story is semi-abstract and it doesn't really specify characters or anything like that. But still, this is definitely a well fleshed out narrative. The album definitely does a great job at keeping you engaged when it comes to lyrics. The track Rorschach pretty much being about how you can have all this information about this other individual, but in the end it's just a ink block test that is left to interpretation. The track Algernon highlights this protagonist's struggle with trying to remember who this one individual is, and he pretty much tries to lie to his own wife, who he doesn't even know is his own wife, about who that person is, but she knows he's lying, and he just gets frustrated with all this. I think some portion of the time he's talking about a guy with Alzheimer's, or at the perspective of someone with Alzheimer's, or some kind of memory debilitating disease or something like that. It definitely does feel that way with a track like Beachtowel, and especially Algernon, and a little bit of this track Wake. One thing I do have to give props to with the album is definitely doing its homework when it comes to references to other moments of memory loss, as well as these other wordy moments that I'm still looking up. Like the track Chiaroscuro, which, if you do your research, or if you're just an art major, you know that it's a sort of way of painting that literally means light-dark, where they basically use light and dark colors to create other dimensions to it. And the song talks about how he is pretty much lost in this light darkness in a way, this sort of purgatory-ish gray area that he can't escape from because of his memory loss. And the closing track, Sleep, is how he is pretty much accepted the futility of the situation, and he hopes that he doesn't go to sleep. I guess either because he'll end up dreaming about old times he knows nothing about, or things that are better than the reality is now, or because of this sort of cognitively debilitating situation, he'll die if he goes to sleep. And the latter seems to be the case, since the latter half of this track is a hidden track kind of pretty much highlighting what it's like to go to heaven, I guess. It's pretty interesting and definitely heartfelt. So nothing really wrong with the lyrics here. I think the album does a great job fleshing out this concept. It pretty much has a running theme of memory loss and loss of human identity, and what that means for the remainder of one person as well as human being as a whole in terms of history. It definitely highlights how important memory is, and since not a lot of people realize that. So then remains the strongest thing about the album, as well as, in a way, the Achilles heel to the album: the production and instrumentation. The album does a fantastic job at weaving what feels like a 68-minute suite. The production makes it to where each track glides so seamlessly into the next that you wouldn't be able to tell if it went into another track unless you looked at the track listing as you were listening to the album on whatever device you have. Other tracks like Empiricist and Unusual are particularly lengthy, and they definitely make you feel like that there's more than one track in one track. The album pretty much is definitely influenced by bands like Bright Eyes, Arcade Fire, At Moments, Exposing the Sky, maybe some Sigur Rós, Broken Social Scene. I detect a lot of Broken Social Scene on this album. To an extent, the Microphones. So, not really an original sound per se, but they do the sound a lot of justice, and I think if they continue to go down this path, they definitely can leave their own impression on the listener with the albums to come. Tracks like Empiricist and Unusual do a lot with the instrumentation. It's definitely a well fleshed out and multi-part instrumental, whereas with tracks like Remember and Coverings are pretty straightforward and stick to one single motif. The album features a lot of great and beautiful strings. There's definitely horns here that sound great, they sound pretty present. The acoustic guitar work sounds beautiful and gorgeous. I do like the moments of electric guitar and bass guitar on this album. And the drums are definitely have a lot of presence, and depending on the track have different timbres to them. A track like Darker definitely has a sort of dark vibe to it and gets a little eccentric at moments. The track Sleep definitely has a lot of progression as it goes into a dirge-like acoustic setting that I dig a lot before. It then glides into the hidden track, which has been nicknamed After Party, that is a lot more uplifting and cheery. I do like how bright the piano chords are on this track. The only tracks that I don't really care all that much for in terms of instrumentation, namely would be the track Mansion. It's too brief for me, and I definitely see where it serves in terms of the concept, but it doesn't really do all that much that is gonna stick out within the 52 seconds. I guess the track Beachtowel serves more as an extension or a prologue to the track Remember, and that's where I actually want to go into my major complaint with this album. It's great conceptually, and it definitely does a great job at providing a beautiful, well-produced, and well-executed 68-minute experience, but unfortunately there's not a whole lot that's going to distinguish each one track from another, and a major culprit of that would be the vocals. Not only does Kyle not take advantage of the fact that he has a band that has 11 members in it and a concept that requires multiple perspectives, he doesn't really change up his vocal inflection all that much. It makes it kind of difficult to discern which track is which, unless you're, like I said, looking at the device you're using when you listen to the album. Take the tracks Beachtowel and Remember. I can't tell the difference between these two tracks a lot of the time. And at moments when I am listening to the album, the track Bergeron doesn't really sound all that different from Darker. If anything, it sounds more like an extension to Darker. A good portion of these tracks definitely could sound like that they could have been weaved together and led to there being less tracks versus just this multi-part suite, which, to be fair though, it does make the album more palpable than doing the other thing would, but still, I do find that there need to be more diversity all across the album for the tracks to stand alone by themselves. And they didn't intend for an album that has tracks that can stand by themselves. I get that. But unfortunately, when I'm going through the album, I'm kind of, at times, waiting on a track to be over so I can get to a track that I think is better. Or more so, a moment that I know is actually going to happen that I think is better. Now, don't get me wrong, I like this album a lot. I actually do find a lot to love about this album. The album has a strong concept, a strong instrumental backbone. The vocals aren't too bad, if homogenic for the most part. But unfortunately, it does lead to some moments that aren't distinct from others throughout the course of the album, which kind of sucks since your album is close to 70 minutes in length. I do hope that if they do try to go for another album that is like this in terms of concept, in terms of instrumental progression, that they keep this in mind, because that's what made an album like The Downward Spiral so great. It is a great and interesting album, and I'd recommend this to anybody that likes albums with a certain concept about it, more so within the realm of memory loss and identity and human history, as well as fans of bands like Arcade Fire, Broken Social Scene, Bright Eyes. But again, this is a huge thing about the album that I find is lacking. All that being said though, like I said, I think this is a great album, and I wholeheartedly recommend it to people that like indie rock, that like post-rock. If you are looking for an album that is well fleshed out, if you're looking for a progressive and kind of haunting experience, then definitely check this album out. It'll be up your alley for sure. This album is a plus 2.3 out of plus 3. My only complaint with this album, unfortunately, was a big thing with this album, that there wasn't that much to discern one track from another. But I think as a whole, the album delivers a pleasant and well fleshed out experience, so that's not too big of a deal, even if it is a significant detail that was overlooked when making this album. But if you give this album a listen, what'd you think of it? Did you like this album? Did you dislike this album? What was the reason for that, and what you consider listening to and reviewing next? This is CW Music here, signing off.